Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft and the world in between. Let's get things started with the SAP side of the house. So with a short blog post by Marco Dorn with a very important topic around the Kyma runtime, focusing on how capacity units are calculated for the Kyma runtime, which is not too straightforward, but it's also not super complex. And this blog post is really extremely helpful on telling you how to get, how to wrap your head around that. There are two things that I want to especially highlight in the lower part of the blog post with respect to the topic, why are there more VMs active than I would expect with respect to the utilization of my cluster? Well, that might be because you have reserved too much CPU memory for your apps. And this will mean that Kubernetes has to spin up more VMs because in order to fulfill this reserving. So check that. And there is also one important second announcement, and that's about the event throughput. In the original calculator, there was something called event throughput, which would contribute to your costs. That has been removed. That's no longer there. That makes the overall calculation much easier. So if you plan to use the Kyma runtime, if you are already using the Kyma runtime and are not sure if you have done your calculations correctly, go through that blog post, read it, definitely worth it. Then aftermath of SAP Sapphire, of course, there is a podcast by John Reed of Diginomica, and together with Josh Greenbaum, they made a short 40-minute review of the SAP Sapphire Orlando 2022. I've referenced the SoundCloud link in the show notes if you're interested in that. And then also from the world of SAP, if you're interested, I have put the link in there. The annual general meeting of shareholders of SAP took place, which is, from a strategic perspective, of course, always interesting. And I have referenced the official landing page within the show notes, where you can watch the replay of the webcast, so of the session per se, and you can also directly read the opening address of Christian Klein, which is available there. So if you're interested in that, take a look there. And with that, let's switch to the world of Microsoft. And there is one video on the .NET channel of Microsoft available. So it's on YouTube.NET channel, about the Azure Functions v4 runtime and what's new about the v4 runtime for .NET developers. If you are regularly listening to this podcast, or if you are in the Azure Functions world anyway, then you are aware that there is the in-process way to, or is it called in-process? I think so. In-process, yeah. In-process way and the isolated way, how to execute functions since .NET 5. And with .NET 6, that of course was continued, and especially the way forward is the isolated way. And that is a big difference for .NET functions, because they had quite some functionality due to the fact that they have been running in process. And that's something special. And if you are new to Azure Functions, or if you want to see what changes there, then that's definitely worth it. For all the other folks using JavaScript, Python, TypeScript, I don't know what, there is no big difference, because we have anyway always been in the isolated way. And hopefully we will benefit now from the new features that will come up for .NET isolated executions. Then in the same area, there is a blog post on techisweb.net. It's exactly about one special aspect of running .NET Azure Functions in an isolated way, so in the out-of-process model. Because now you can plug in your own custom middleware when functions are invoked. And this blog post gives you some useful APIs in order to write your own middleware, and gives you some ideas what you can do there. Then, picking up from last week, the Azure Static Web App anniversary took place on May the 19th, and all the videos are now available. So if you want to catch up, if you want to see what happened over the last year with Azure Static Web Apps, I have referenced the landing page in the show notes. And as a, let's say, side effect of the anniversary, the Azure Static Web App CLI is now GA. So it's exactly so in the anniversary eventing there, the version 1 was announced, and I have referenced the link to the GitHub repository, which also gives you an overview on all the things that have been now or are now part of this version 1, which is quite a lot. There are also some breaking changes that you should take a look at. Then switching from purely serverless to serverless containers in the best sense, there is now a public preview for Azure Container Apps. They support log streaming. That's something that I've referenced last week with respect to the Microsoft documentation, and also to Console Connect. So you can now also connect via Bash to your containers. I've referenced the announcement within the show notes. There is a link in there which gives you more details about what's possible there. In addition, there is also one announcement that is called Dapper Announcement, but that is relevant for Azure Container Apps. So with respect to the Azure Container Apps, there is a breaking change, or a change of behavior. It's not a breaking change, it's a change of behavior with respect to the default content type that is used for Dapper service invocation. So up to now, if you didn't specify that for the Azure Container Apps, the default content type was defaulted to application/JSON, and that is now no longer the case. And the GitHub issue that I've referenced in the show notes tells you what's now the new default behavior, what are the actions that you have to do, and there is also one comment down below which tells you by an example in Python what would fail and how to find out if you are subject to some issues that come along with that behavioral change. And then, of course, this week there is basically one thing that you have to announce with respect to containers and Kubernetes, because KubeCon took place in Valencia as a hybrid event. So the KubeCon and Cloud Native Con Europe 2022 took place. And if you couldn't participate, no worries. All the videos, I guess, will be sooner or later available on YouTube, and the stuff already started. So the playlist around KubeCon is already filling up with especially the short talks, I guess, because they are quite easily to edit because they're short. And there is also, if you want to have already a sneak peek, there are already several more videos uploaded to the channels with respect to the special streams and days on KubeCon. So if you are really wanting to take a sneak peek, then directly head over to the video section of CNCF, because there you might find something that's not yet on the playlist. If you are specifically interested on what Microsoft presented at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, then I've referenced the corresponding blog post by the Microsoft open source blog, which guides you through the, let's say, Microsoft point of view thingies that happen at KubeCon with respect to announcement, with respect what they did over the last year, and so on. And there is one talk that I would especially like to highlight, and that's a talk by Daniel Bryant that is not yet available in the CNCF channel, and that's called From Kubernetes to Pass to What's Next. This talk was taking place in the application development or something like that was the track, and it was focusing on how do application developers think about all the Kubernetes stuff, and what do you have to do in order to make their life easier. That was just a super great talk from my perspective, because, as also mentioned in the talk, there is always a big focus on the ops side of Kubernetes, which is fair, of course, but Kubernetes is a platform to build platforms, and basically the platform engineers should make the life of the application engineers as comfortable as possible by providing such platforms. And this talk really perfectly brings that to a point. So if that's available, I will anyway reference that in upcoming show notes then, but that's just a great one from my perspective. Then let's switch over to GitHub and DevOps. This time, I think only GitHub, yeah. What's new with GitHub? So for release assets, you will now find the creation dates for the release assets as of May the 18th. So it's not only, it's 3 days a week before a year ago, but it's really the exact date when the release asset was created. I think that's really helpful. Then some updates with respect to Markdown pasting on GitHub. That's really cool. So if you now paste a link or a text that contains a link, that link will be rendered as a link in Markdown. And if you copy something like a table from any spreadsheet, like Excel or Google spreadsheet, that will be rendered as Markdown tables. And you do not have to do anything. That comes there out of the box. That's really helpful. Thanks GitHub for that. Then another super useful feature that also came out this week is if you have branches and you want to compare the difference between branches, you up to now saw that there is a difference, so that you are 1 commit ahead and 2 commit behind. And now this information is linked to the real differences. So you will now no longer only see tags, but you will see links, and the links are split with respect to what are you ahead of, what are you behind of, and you can now click on them and get more detailed comparison. Then another tool that I personally really like, and that's dependable alerts. They will show now all affected files for vulnerable function calls. Up to now, they just showed one. This will be improved by showing every finding explicitly. That's currently in beta phase, and that's only available for Python alerts. So it's public beta. So if you are using Python, you might already get an insight on that one. It's not available for other languages up to now, but it's on the roadmap. I've referenced the announcement, and there is also reference to the public roadmap. Then if you're using the GitHub app for Slack or for Teams, there is also an improvement, and I think at 2 very important areas. First one, the onboarding or installation of the app for the first time is now gives you a better experience with respect to the guidance, how do you set things up. And that's, I think, super important, because how often do you set up such an app? It's not something that will be burned into your muscle memory. This is something that you rarely do. And if that's a smooth experience, that's great. And also the learning about the app functionalities is now simplified with a new structure and a new setup of the help. And then one super important news this week around security, especially, of course, of interest for enterprises using GitHub. GitHub now achieves the ISO IEC 27001 2013 certification. And that's all about security management systems. Information security management systems, ISMSs. And GitHub is now successfully certified against that ISO standard. And the blog post that I've referenced gives you some insights, and that's important to take a look at that one, because it tells you what is the scope of ISMS. And here I especially like to see that GitHub Actions are part of that scope, and what features are included. So there you will see that there are not all features included, but with pull request issues and so on, I think the most important ones. So as an enterprise, I think that's great news. Then there is also an update for the GitHub issues. As usual, there is this regular update page that I've referenced in my show notes. There is 2 things that I really like. First of all, the issue closed reason. So why do you close an issue? Maybe it's completed and it's solved. So it's done, the fix is provided. or there is close that is not planned, so it won't be fixed. It's a duplicate whatsoever. And you can then use those two reasons for closing in upcoming filtering of your issues. That's, I think, really helpful. And for those of you who are using projects on GitHub, you can now delete projects. Up to now, you could close projects, but they would be still alive. And now you can also completely delete them. That's really cool. And then one GitHub action that was featured by GitHub, and I would also like to reference that one because that looks really cool. That's a GitHub action that's using size limit. Size limit is a performance budget tool for JavaScript in order to calculate the cost of your JavaScript for the end user, like the size, the loading time, and so on. And this is now encapsulated in a GitHub action. I think that's really useful for folks doing JavaScript development. And then some more broader topics from the GitHub area. First one is how to measure inner source across your organization. So that's a really interesting blog post because that's basically a measurement of collaboration going beyond the borders of teams within your organization. So if you are fostering inner source, that's important. And it also tells you what's the current state depending on the percentage of inner source contributions. So what does that basically mean? Very interesting blog post, and I think very useful because inner source is something that I think is more and more getting into the enterprise area. And then another blog post due to the Global Accessibility Awareness Day that happened this week about how GitHub is continuing to enable all developers to build. Of course, they have GitHub UIs, they have their CLI and so on, and their apps. And this blog post tells you on how they want to help everybody to access GitHub, what is their approach, and what is their way forward. Now, with that, let's switch to the world in between, the twilight zone between SAP and Microsoft. First of all, a blog post by Martin Pankratz that is picking up the video of the SAP on Azure podcast that I've referenced last week with respect to Purview and SAP and how to combine those two offerings. Very important note, and I like that Martin brings it up because that's something that's often overseen when you play around with technology. When you want to implement that on your system and write back to SAP system especially, then verify your licensing agreement because that might have some surprises for you. Now there is this blog post by Martin on the SAP community. That's a short overview blog post giving you some more information about where to find additional resources. And there is one more extensive blog post on the topic in the tech community of Microsoft, where Martin guides you through a bit more in detail on the combination of those things. So diving more into detail, what was also shown within the video on the SAP on Azure podcast. And with that, let's switch to the one and only Holger Bruchelt, who was quite busy during the last weeks, I would say. So there is one blog post that I would like to highlight where Holger shares his view on the low coding statements, announcements, state of affairs from Sapphire and DSAG Technology Days, where he was on site on both events, guiding you on those topics, especially with respect to integration of Power Apps, integration of Microsoft 365, and so on. And in the same area, there is also a podcast available with Holger. This time he's guest on the state of process automation. It's a German podcast where he's explaining how the software industry changed and how the future will look like, of course, with a dedicated focus on process automation, which perfectly fits into, well, all things Power Platform and low code, no code. And then kind of wrapping up things. There is, of course, also, as it's Saturday, a new SAP and Azure video podcast available. This time focusing on Power Apps, but also taking a look, for example, on AppGyver, which was pushed during Sapphire. So again, I think that's a very important topic. Also, it's heavily pushed, if I remember correctly, the agenda of the upcoming build next week of Microsoft Build, where there is quite some center of gravity around the Power Platform and low-code, no-code. And with that, let's switch to the area of learning and upcoming events. As the regular guest on my show, at least virtually, I want to highlight two videos of Golo Roden. First one that I want to reference is a live stream that happened on Wednesday, which was a Ask Me Anything live stream. And that was really cool. So I really liked that one. So if you want to learn something more about Golo and on different tons of topics, that's really the one that you should watch. And then as announced by Golo, and that was quite quick from my perspective, he had one video where he presented I have to look that up, Structure of Interpretation of Computer Programs JavaScript Edition. So the book that he proposed as one of the books that you should take a look at. He's now doing a video series around that one called SICP.js. And the first one was kicked out this week with the DNA of programming. So it's kind of an introduction, but I think with the upcoming sessions that will be getting more and more into the depth and will be, as usual, great stuff by Golo. And then another podcast that I would like to highlight, if you want to spend some half an hour on the topic of scalability, there is a new podcast by the To-Do Cast. It's a German podcast about exactly that topic, talking about scalability, what to think about horizontal scaling, vertical scaling, and so on. And then if you are trying or aiming to do certification with respect to the certified Kubernetes area, I have referenced already several resources over the last weeks. And this week I have one for you if you are aiming for the security specialist. I have referenced the GitHub repository that gives you a curated overview about this certification, what's in the exam, what URLs are you allowed to use in order to pass the exam, and of course, learning resources for the different topics that you should take a look at. One kind of basic overview for the different areas that are covered by the certification, and then a lot of other super useful material. So if you are planning to do that certification, I think that GitHub repository is definitely worth taking a look at. Then one announcement with respect to events. There is the Cloudland coming up, which is kind of mimicking, from my perspective, the Javaland that is already happening for several years. It's also happening in the Phantasialand in Brühl, a German event. It's the Cloud Native Festival, according to its headline. In the German-speaking Cloud Native community, it has several streams, also taking, let's say, focus areas each day. So it's a 4-day event about container and cloud technology, continuous integration and delivery, microservices, and domain-driven design. I especially like that they focus also on domain-driven design, and DevOps and methodology. So that will take place at the end of June and beginning of July. So if you are in Germany, if you are interested, then I have referenced the landing page in the show notes. And if you're warming up for Microsoft Build, that is happening next week from Tuesday on, then I have referenced a short, very funny video about the Microsoft archives, where Scott Hanselman walks through those archives and takes a look at what's stored there. And then from the area of developer productivity, I have referenced one blog post by GitHub on how they are drinking their own champagne, namely how they are using projects to build projects. And I think it's always interesting to see, first of all, it's great to see that they use it. And second, it is really interesting to see how they leverage it, what they leverage, and what insights they have there. And with that, I'm at the end of today's sessions. And if you took a look or navigated to this video, you might have seen the headline of the video. You might have seen the tweet where I have said the end. And the question is now, is this the end of this podcast? Is this the end of myNewsWrap? And it's a clear yes or no. So I have reflected a bit over the, well, it's now the 85th episode. I've reflected a bit about the effort I put in, about the value that I give. Of course, I also took a look at the analytics that YouTube provides you and so on. And I think I will switch the format to that sense that I will provide the NewsWrap, the overview of news that I think is valuable on GitHub. So the GitHub page and all the new stuff there with the references, that is something that will continue. So that's not ended. What will come to an end is the regular videos every week and the corresponding podcast, because I just drag out the audio of the video. This will be the last video of myNewsWrap, of the regular session. And also, if you're just listening, the last podcast that's available there. If you want to keep up with the news that I present, if you like that, then just subscribe to my Twitter, LinkedIn handle, or just the easiest way is to watch the GitHub repository, because I will push the news there every week. That will, as I said, continue. I'm thinking about doing some different stuff, something that is not that short-lived like the news every week, something that is more hands-on, where I might try out maybe, let's say, just on the top of my head, trying out what's new in Twitter, what happened last month, what's new in Twitter, what's new in GitHub, what happened there over the last 4 weeks. Let's try it out, let's show that, let's do some hands-on, something like that, maybe something different. Maybe I have several ideas. I don't know yet where I'm going, but there will be some news. So if you wanna stay up with that one, you can also, of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not yet, and see what's coming up differently. And with that, I wish you a nice Saturday, a great Sunday, successful next week, and well, we will not see next Saturday, but happy if you consume the news on GitHub that I will provide next week. And maybe we will see in one of the other upcoming videos that I plan to do. And with that,